Hello and welcome back to In Conversation. This is a series I do where I talk to different authors and writers about all things writing and publishing. And this is a different format of In Conversation because this is a panel. There's more than one person. There's a whole panel of people, and there's going to be a series of 4 of these. And this is the first one called For the Culture, where we're going to talk all about how our culture is incorporated into our stories and into our narratives and informs our writing. And so I have 4 other lovely writers with me and authors, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, starting with Chrystal.
Hey, hi, I'm Chrystal D Giles, and I am a middle grade author of the upcoming Take Back the Block. It is out January 26th. It's about an 11-year-old boy named Wes who is a reluctant activist. He's born into a family of activists, and he's taken from protest to protest. And he'd rather be at home playing video games or playing basketball or something. But activism becomes personal for him when a powerful developer targets his neighborhood for redevelopment. So we follow his journey trying to save his home. But the story also really looks at community and changing friendships along the way.
Amazing. And Sarah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Das, author of Where the Rhythm Takes You, a young adult contemporary retelling of Jane Austen's Persuasion, set in the Caribbean, Tobago specifically. It'll be released by Balzer and Bray, HarperCollins, on May 11th, 2021.
And Louisa?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Louisa Onomé, and my debut novel is a young adult contemporary called Like Home. Like Home is about 16-year-old Nello who is facing some difficult decisions in her life, and after a neighborhood store is vandalized, she realizes the place she's grown to love isn't all that it seems like it was. It's out February 23rd from HarperCollins Canada and Delacorte Press, and it's available for pre-order currently.
Perfect. And Shakirah?
Hi, I'm Shakirah Bourne, and I'm an author born and based in Barbados. Josephine Against the Sea is my debut novel. It's a middle grade contemporary fantasy book, and it's about a little girl, Josephine, who finds out that her dad's new girlfriend is a vengeful sea creature. So it's kind of perfect for people who like Tracy Baptiste de Jambies or Austen's The Girl Who Cried Monster. And it's coming out with Scholastic on July 6, 2021.
Perfect. And the Jumbies is exactly what came into my head. That's awesome. And all their information is available in the description below, so you can pre-order and add to Goodreads and do all of that awesome stuff and learn more about their books and them as authors. And then we can go ahead and get started with the first question. So what aspects of your own culture do you bring into your writing process and story?
I'll go first. So my book is set in the US. It's in a southern setting. I don't explicitly say where the story takes place, but it's loosely based on my hometown of Charlotte, North Carolina. And it's Black Southern culture. And so it was important for me to really show aspects of family and kind of deep South roots. So that was kind of what I really wanted to bring into the book itself. I wrote the book really for young Black kids growing up kind of in a city center. And it was also important for me to have really strong family ties. There's a lot of community talk in the book. Some of the fun Southern stuff I brought into the book were just like nosy neighbors and like the whole idea that it takes a village to raise a child. And so my main character, Wes, is constantly kind of being watched by his neighbor, Mr. Hank. And he's kind of like the grandfatherly character in the book. And I think in middle grade, there's sometimes a notion of younger characters kind of wandering off on their own and not many adult characters in the book in a prominent way. And for me, in Southern culture, that's just not going to happen, right? Like you're going to have your parents in your face. You will not be wandering around for days on end with no instruction. And so there are sections of the book where the kids just have a fun adventure, but there's always going to be a parent overlooking. And so I think that's for sure Southern Black culture as well.
The Rhythm Takes You is actually set in Tobago, so that alone allows for a lot of opportunity to incorporate, the culture in, because this is the setting. They get to visit certain places, they get to eat a lot of very local food, but also very important to the story itself is music. It plays a huge role in bringing the characters together, and in a way, it's also how they kind of communicate, in a way, and. So I got to include a lot of soca and some calypso, some steel pan music. And so it was actually really interesting because it gave me an opportunity to sort of research. Like, even though, I live here my whole life, I still had to, look up some stuff, and it actually gave me a new appreciation for my own music and culture as well.
So my book is set in like a fictional suburb of Toronto. And my main character, she's Nigerian Canadian, like me. So I tried to incorporate hints of what it's like to kind of be like a diaspora kid, because it's a really sort of nuanced experience where it's like you're not firmly Nigerian, but you're also not firmly Canadian. So it's kind of like existing between the two. But also one thing I really wanted to incorporate is just like what it's like living in the Greater Toronto area that we call the GTA. And like what it's like, I guess, being like a Toronto youth, which is a thing. But just in general, just how those two worlds collide. Because what I thought was really interesting, actually, like when I was first querying my book, I realized not a lot of people like have a complete view of what living in Toronto is like, or what living in a Toronto suburb is like. And I think in general, like when people say suburbs, there's a specific idea they have. But like Ginger East, the neighborhood in my book, is not really that typical sort of suburb thing. So I thought, like, I don't know, I hope my book kind of helps people broaden their view of Toronto, and I think what suburbs are like as well.
My book is set in Barbados, and sorry, I got really excited when you talked about steel pan, because in another life, I swore I was going to be a steel pan player. I kid you not. I used to love steel pan. It was my life. And after a very embarrassing incident, which I will not reveal, I decided to change courses. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. So it's set in Barbados, and I would love for people to read the book and just kind of get the feel of a fishing village in Barbados. That kind of laid back vibe where everyone knows everyone. There's a sea at every view. And I really want people to like feel the energy. So, 4 old men playing dominoes on the road. And I that's what I would love to bring in. And of course, the folklore, because I just really wanted to see a book where someone went on an adventure that I could relate to. Yes, vampires are cool, don't get me wrong. But we also have our own version of vampires in the Caribbean. We have the Sukuya, they suck the blood of children. So I would love a book to really see these type of creatures. And that's kind of why I wrote my book. So I hope that people would get a sense of the adventures and the characters and the folklore and the mythology that we have here. And it was funny, even in my copy edits, I was kind of educating my copy editor as well. Like, oh yes, all Caribbean people refer to a hot drink as tea, even if it's hot chocolate, And so like, it was really entertaining because I learned stuff about my culture too, because, as a copy editor, they had to research facts. So she told me about like the origins of certain words. And I was like, oh, wow, thank you for telling me. So I hope that people will read the book, and, I would get messages about, oh, we did this in Scotland, or, oh, we have this character in France. And just really get people to see a new environment that maybe they wouldn't have seen before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's amazing. And I'll chat a little bit about how I incorporate my culture into my stories. I grew up in Toronto in a Trinidadian household. And so it is like, yeah, Trinidad and Tobago. I always just say Trinidad because my family's from the Trinidad side, but like it's the same sort of thing. But yeah, growing up in Toronto, somewhat outside, in, like Louisa said, in that kind of Toronto suburb place, but like really incorporating not only the diaspora experience, but also incorporating artifacts of my culture that have come before me, because in my book, they can communicate with their ancestors that came before them. So it's not only like this Trinidadian Canadian culture that they've grown up with, but also interacting with ancestors that, for example, were from the States or were slaves, or that history of them coming to Canada and how that kind of informed what they did and how they became witches and how they did that culture. And similarly, it's interesting, like what you learn about your own personal history. And this wasn't a question, but I'm interested to hear like the sorts of things that everyone learned through this process of incorporating your culture. If you learned anything new about yourself or your family. For me personally, I ended up like learning a lot about my family history and like how we ended up in Canada and how part of my family ended up in Trinidad and how all that worked. And a lot about like how we were Black loyalists and then we got land in Trinidad and then we eventually immigrated, and kind of ended up learning so much more about my own family history than I would have without doing the book.
On like a very basic, I learned this level, Shakirah was talking about copy editing and like learning how to spell words that I use every day, you know, the dialect words that I just never needed to know how to spell. It was an interesting experience. Yeah, and sort of going back and forth with the copy editors on certain things. That was interesting.
Yeah. It's the same for me. I had to learn a lot more about the mythology, which I really enjoyed because, because of our colonial history, we brought most of these legends from West Africa, but then each of them took on different characteristics depending on the island. So I don't want to spoil the who's the main villain in my story, but I had to research the manifestations of the character in 5 or 6 different islands. And I found out, there's one in Scotland, there's one in France. So it was very interesting learning about the different legends and basically how far reaching it goes. Because I don't think we realize, I think it was like we grew up with it, but we don't really think that it exists so far in different countries, just maybe like a different name or something. I did a presentation in Scotland, and a person came to me and like, oh, we have a version of a dwen. And I was like, oh, really? A dwen is a child who died before they were baptized. And you would know that it's a dwen because its feet would be turned backwards and it has a little mushroom hat. And basically, it would call you from the forest, and people who follow the voice tend to be lost forever. So they're like, oh, we have that type of character. I cannot remember the name right now, but it's just always interesting to hear how these legends manifest in different countries.
So are there any stories or local lore from your culture that have made it into your books or work?
I would say that nothing that's like a folklore. I think stories though, yes. So not to give a lot of the story away, but there is a section of the book that happens later on where we learn a lot about like Black excellence and how a lot of times in American culture that Black excellence is kind of wiped away or dismissed. And you have like hidden figures that were prominent in music or invention, and we just absolutely don't ever hear about it. And so those stories, I think we hear a lot about growing up. It's like, oh, this song was originally made by X person. And, even today, we're finding things that we had no idea was done. And so those stories, I tried to implement this idea of Black excellence being taken and kind of just wiped off the map. And so that's a part of a story that I wanted to put in this book. And so that's there. And kind of in relation to the last question you asked about research, that was one of the things that I ended up researching a lot. And it wasn't directly family related, but more about the city and the city I grew up in. And there's so many excellent Black things that happened in my city, and neighborhoods that were created and all that kind of stuff. And you wouldn't know it because it's not talked about outside of certain circles. And so that's one of the things I wanted to bring in to my story as it relates to community and making sure that we pay respects to the people who really worked hard to create inclusive communities and who often don't get credit for it.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's that's a part of that's part of local lore in a way, and for sure.
I do reference certain mythical creatures like the Dwens that Shakirah mentioned earlier. I do reference them, a little bit of mermaids, just in sort of in the setting sort of sphere. That's where I sort of mention it, but it isn't as in depth because it is contemporary.
As my book is contemporary, there's not really any sort of like cultural lore, but there are a lot of stories that kind of inform Nello's world, like a lot of hidden rules or hidden stories, and like kinds of the things that we make up when we're children. So things like don't go down there, like that bike path is like for older kids, or that house is haunted when it's dark, so don't go past there, and like stuff like that. So more so those things than cultural lore is present in my story.
Like stories that end up incorporated into like your area and where you live and like that culture.
Well, obviously there's a lot of Caribbean mythology in it, but apart from like the obvious monsters and villains and spirits, I really wanted to get the vibe of the people. Like I got in a car accident once, unfortunately, and the car was flipped upside down, and it was about 5 a.m. in the morning, and everyone that passed, I kid you not, they slowed down. They were like, who dead? And I was standing right there. I was like, I'm fine. And they were all like, you're so lucky, you should be dead. You need to walk out of the sea backwards. Every person told me I had to go to the beach and walk out the sea backwards because clearly I am lucky and I need to wash off any bad spirits or bad vibe and bad juju. So I kind of really wanted to show some of the superstitious nature of the people, not just the folklore characters, but just how the people are and the little things that they would do just because of myths or passed on beliefs. So yeah.
Great to like hear also how like contemporary authors and fantasy authors like incorporate those sorts of stories in different ways, because I think there's definitely like one way that like myths and that sort of thing can more obviously be incorporated into like fantasy works, but I think there's also a different way that like stories can still like play a role, especially cultural stories in contemporary works as well, especially like when I think of character development and that sort of thing. In my book, my grandpa did not really tell us any stories growing up. And so I didn't have any like folklore or anything like that. I think he told us a story about Anansi like once, and that's like the most I know. But I ended up kind of creating lore and stories out of history. So my characters' histories and like how they interact with their ancestors, like that becomes its own sort of lore. So like X ancestor said this because of their circumstances, and that kind of becomes something that's passed through the family and ends up becoming its own sort of like local lore or stories. Because I didn't have any to pull on because my grandpa didn't want to tell us anything. I say us, I'm his only grandchild, but you know, I thought I was going to be told a story. I was chased with a little spider once, and that's when he mentioned Anansi, and that was the end of it.
I really like that question because it really made me stop and think about like not direct folklore, but like all of the stories we were told as kids and like how it really shapes our opinion of the world. And, you know, to this day, it's like things that feel superstitious, but like I believe these things. They're a part of who I am. And so when I saw that question, it really made, at first I was like, yeah, no, there's nothing. But I thought, actually, you know what? There's a lot of stuff in the story that I just feel like it's true, and probably just because it's cultural and regional, but no one else would relate to it in that same way. And so that question really made me stop and think about the stories, you know, that we heard growing up. And so.
And sometimes you don't realize, because you're in the culture, you don't realize that it's something specific to you until you tell a story to someone and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I honestly thought that if you washed your hair at night that you would catch a cold, like that it was guaranteed. Like you know, that's what my mom and my grandmother, oh, you can't wash your hair. And to this day, they still believe that if the sun is down and you wash your hair, you will get a cold. So like, it's all these little things that you don't think about. It's only when you kind of pass them on to other people and they look at you like, what are you talking about? That's when you realize, okay, I guess that's just a Tobagonian thing or a Canadian thing, or, you know. Yeah.
I agree 100%. I feel like there's a lot of small things that, like, it's just like you were saying, like, you go outside of the culture and you realize that, like, oh, nobody else really thinks this, or like people think different variations. Like, I remember growing up, my mom would always, like, I think I put something similar to this in my book, but my mom would always, like, growing up, she'd be like, every time I got sick, she's like, well, it's because you don't eat food. Like, you're always eating like junk or whatever, like you don't eat like actual food. And I was like, that's not true, that's not true. But then, like, as I grew up, every time I got sick, I was like, oh, it's because I didn't eat any food or like whatever. And it just stays with you. And I think it was only when I like verbally said it to somebody in school once, and they were like, that doesn't make any sense. To me, I was like, no, this makes perfect sense. Like, every time I've been sick, because I didn't eat rice or like whatever. So yeah, it's insane.
That's the thing. It creeps in to your thing, and that's just the way it ends up being. Same with like the wet hair thing. I think I washed my hair at night once, and I was so like, I wrapped it up in a towel, and I was so worried. I was like, oh, I'm definitely gonna get sick. Terrified, just like sleeping. I was like, oh, this was the only time I could do it. And then I didn't. I was like, huh.
Yeah. Same. And I'm not even like, I'm just from the US. It's the same way. Like, no, you cannot go to bed with wet hair. So
So definitely heard that.
Just random stuff. And then my mom decides to be suspicious sometimes. So you can't put your purse on the floor, and like all of that stuff.
Oh my god! I once found black-eyed peas in my stepmom's purse, and I was like, "Why do you have peas?" And she was like, "Leave my peas alone." And so I was like, "Okay." And then later on, like, my cousin told me she believes they can protect you from evil spirits, and we all laughed. But, you know, I won't remove her peas because, you know, it's not causing me any harm. And, you know, just in case.
Yeah.
You just never know.
So now we're going to do something a little bit different. I jacked this game off of TikTok, but you basically like put all your hands up, and then I will say a statement. And then if it applies to the person's book, they will put one finger down. And then at the end, you'll get to see how many fingers down people had for each statement. So everyone could just raise their hands, because I'll just read the statements and then you can react accordingly. Okay, I'm starting with statements. I'm looking over here. There's a second screen. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. Okay. So put down a finger if you have descriptions of food that go on for more than 2 sentences. Put a finger down if you have meddling / in your business extended family members, things like cousins, aunts, etc. Put a finger down if you have a non-American word that you don't explicitly explain. Put a finger down if your characters attend a large cultural celebration. Put a finger down if another character is confused by a cultural thing your character does. Put a finger down if your main character can speak a language other than English or code switches. Put a finger down if your character experiences some sort of discrimination. Put a finger down if a cultural folktale or story is referenced in the book. Put a finger down if there's any reference to diaspora or the experience of living outside of the homeland. And put a finger down if your characters express a love or pride towards their culture / heritage, whether explicitly or implicitly. Interesting results. Cool. And I think something interesting that maybe we can talk about is I think some of these questions are experiences that are maybe more like diaspora geared, and then others are kind of like experiences that I think are a little bit more universal. And so that I thought was interesting. But I do want to specifically point to this non-American word that you don't explicitly explain, because to my knowledge, we are all being published in the US. And publishing is like a very US centric corporation, is that industry? There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. And so I kind of find it interesting. I'd love to know your perspectives on when you are introducing words from your culture, even that might not be familiar to American audiences, but maybe even not be familiar to audiences who are like outside of your state or that specific culture that you are exploring. And I'd love to hear if anyone has thoughts on that.
I always feel like when introducing words from a different culture or like whatnot, I don't know, like there's a lot of people you see online that are kind of like, should I italicize it? Should I explain it? And that sort of camp, like it's kind of like there's two different things. And I've been thinking about this for a while because I don't know where I fall. Because on one hand, like I don't want someone to read it and be like, I don't know what this person's saying. And then they're completely taken out of it. But on the other hand, I feel like sometimes, especially from the perspective of the character, explaining it can be a little bit like disingenuous. Like I don't know, it's like I'm doing this and in brackets it's like this, and it's like, but the person, like the kid, the character would not have to explain that sort of thing in the universe that they live. So it's difficult. I don't know. I italicize words if they're new, but I tend to not want to explain them. I just kind of am like, the context will tell you, like you'll learn, it'll be fine. But,
absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. I try to make sure that it's put in a context that you can kind of figure out what it means. And if you don't understand every single word in the book, so what? You know, you'll learn, you'll understand, you'll miss one thing, you can go and research it later. I went to I don't know if you guys know Trainspotting by Irvin Welch. I went to one of his talks and he talked about, you know, the publishing of the book and how it became this cult sensation. And I asked someone if they could look in the book. And when I opened it, it was just Scottish language completely. Like there's a glossary. I'm not sure if there's a glossary. I think there is. But it was just so unapologetically Scottish. I was just stunned because I always had this fear that if I wrote in dialect, someone would think I'm making a spelling error or I don't know, grammar or is some kind of mistake. But he honestly didn't care. And I actually asked him if any of the publishers had a problem with his language. And he was just like, no, why would you ask me that? And I guess it was the confidence. I don't know if it is a male thing or a white man thing. I don't know. But he was just like, why would this book that is written in Scotland and set in Scotland, why would you be surprised that there's Scottish language in it? And I actually felt stupid for asking the question. So I kind of am embodying that attitude where I try to make sure that it's understandable or you won't completely lose the plot or the meaning of the line. But at the same time, I'm not going to overly explain stuff either. Like it was very difficult because cricket is a large focus of my book, but I'm not sure how familiar the Americans are with cricket. So like, it took a lot of editing and revising to try to make sure that I explain the game without like making it seem like a teaching moment. So it was tough, but it's possible. So I guess it's just all about balance, and in the end, you just have to do what you think and what you feel is right.
Yeah, it's individual to each author, and they've got to sort of make the call, and not even just in per book, like within the book itself, different instances, and you've got to sort of thread that line between not alienating the people who are publishing your book and in market they're going to be marketing it towards. But also being authentic, you know? So I will admit, I do open the book with a sort of a word and an explanation, and it sort of sets the tone for what's coming. So it's like, oh, so this is the situation. And I straight up explain the word lime because it's so important in Trinidadian culture. You know, I straight up have someone ask, what does that mean, and explain it.
You don't need them to think that it's a fruit.
It's so important. So I just dropped it in and I'm like, great. But for the most part though, I sort of go by context. So I'm sort of hoping that, you know, people sort of get what I mean from the context. But there are some things, I reference some things that I don't know if people who are not Trinidadian or Tobagoan will get. but I think that's fine. Within, it's not something that's going to be, make someone who doesn't know it feel like they're being left out. Yeah. Yeah. But it doesn't like little Easter eggs just for my Trinidad and Tobago readers. Yeah.
Completely agree. It's definitely a judgment call.
Yeah.
I think as a reader of different authors and different cultures, I kind of love that I don't know everything. Like there's sometimes a sentence written in a completely different language, and like you said, context clues will help me out. And even if I don't get it, like that's okay. Like what both of you said about just think about your audience. Like most of us wrote the book for people who are our direct culture, right? It's like we wrote the book that we would have wanted to read as a kid, or we write the book for our community. And so you can just write the book. I think we're maybe moving toward the idea that everything isn't italicized and there isn't like an explanation right under it. I've read several books lately where maybe I didn't get the line, and that's okay,
Yeah. Absolutely. I don't think I didn't put my finger down because I was like, I think I explained a lot, but then the more I was thinking about it, I was like, no, I'm pretty sure there were things I like said, like I'm pretty sure I just put roti in and like didn't, and I was like, everyone knows what roti is, right? And then I was like, maybe not actually. But so much of my stuff ended up being food, so a lot of it it just became part of the description, so a lot of it ended up being like specifically explained in that way. Like when I talked about pylori, it was because they were eating it, and so she was like describing how well she had made it, so a lot of that had come into that. But I think it's really great when people just leave it, like it's their choice to kind of decide or not, and to kind of go with it. And like Chrystal said, like people can look it up, or they can use context, or they can just not know. Sometimes you don't know. The most recent example I'm thinking of is I was reading Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, and they put in Spanish without explaining what the Spanish was, and it was still great. And sometimes I was like, I don't know what that is, and I was like, I don't really want to look it up, so I'm just going to use context, and that's cool for me. And so I think that's something that a lot of people can do, but I do find it an interesting conversation, because I think there was a time in the past where it was kind of like, no, you have to explain every word that you use that audience might not know. You have to explicitly explain that. And I feel like now it's quite a lot different. I think there's a lot more looseness with it. And I also think like editors are a lot more loose with that. Depending. I was told I could not use toque, which is like, it's like a knit hat. I don't know. It's a Canadian thing, but I guess a bunch of Canadians don't even say toque. So,
I do not say toque either. But if you had written there, I'm like, oh, it's a hat. It's like I would have known that. But it's strange, right? It's one of those things that you'd think that like everyone would know that this is, but it's not always the case. So
one of those weird things. Now I just say knit hat. Attend a large cultural celebration I was looking at this is the double-edged sword of this, looking at the screen, so I couldn't actually tell what people put their fingers down for. But if you talked about a large cultural celebration your character goes to, would love to hear more about that.
So my cultural celebration is sort of a weekly party type of thing that they have called Sunday School. In Tobago, it's sort of like a steel pan food. It starts really late on Sunday nights. It's just like a big party in the street, and so it works its way into the book. A little bit of fun, and a way to show off the steel pan.
My book has a block party, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the book. It's a block party, and there's music and dancing, and there's like food, and there's like this really fun description of like Southern barbecue, which is a huge thing in North Carolina. And so that block party scene just felt very like cultural. And I know other people have block parties, but the music and the environment was just super fun, and it just felt cultural.
And it's different in different places. Like I feel like people are having, like, depending on where they live, like their block party might be very different.
Right.
Did anyone else mention one?
No, well, I didn't put up my finger, but I guess I was thinking, I wasn't sure if it would be considered a cultural celebration because, you know, everyone has weddings. I guess, but at this particular wedding, there was calypso music, there was a conga line, and there was like a buffet where you had people going back for second and thirds and have Tupperware containers to carry things home. So I don't know if that's done like in other places, right? So I didn't put up put down my finger because I wasn't sure if it was like a cultural celebration or just normal, but with quirks. I don't know.
You can put down a finger for that. That definitely feels cultural. Some weddings are like super boring and there's plated food and you cannot get second. So
no. Well, then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the second you mentioned the Tupperware container, I'm like, that's a very specific experience. Like
not I wasn't sure, like, you know, no one carries like the big Tupperware containers in their purse and starts like taking home foods for later. No.
I always have a Tupperware container in my trunk in case I go somewhere and there's food. So yeah, very specific though. Like for sure, not a lot of places will let you do that.
Absolutely.
Preparation.
So to be clear, that's like an older folk thing before, like, you know, I just want to make sure I don't represent all Barbadians and I don't really want any messages with, like, we would never do that. I understand, but there's like a certain character who for sure always has a Tupperware container and just always seems to be the first and the last at the buffet.
Yeah. Oh, maybe this one. Characters expressing a love or pride towards their heritage or culture, whether explicitly or implicitly. Would love to hear more about that.
I think that's most of my book. It's sort of her, a large theme of the book is sort of grief and regret, and sort of my main character feels guilty for not doing, or rather not liking, that she's doing something that her mom wanted her to do. Sorry, I'm going to try and explain this. And she sort of has some guilt, and that's sort of the reason why she keeps doing this thing. And it's sort of related, that sort of guilt is related to the fact that what she does want to do is in another country. And so it sort of has that sort of thing where she loves her life, where she lives to an extent, but she feels guilty about wanting to try and follow her dreams somewhere else and sort of leave behind her family, sort of the business that they had. And but they've sort of, so they've sort of been the focus of her life, most of her life, yeah.
Which can create challenges if there's a feeling of wanting to go is like a disrespect of the culture and where you are now.
Yeah. She sort of spends the whole book sort of trying to figure out what she wants and sort of dealing with that grief and that regret and that guilt. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, my character, Josephine, she's a huge cricket lover. Like, it's her dream to become a cricket bowler. So I did have to compare it to baseball so people could at least understand that, one, it was a sport, and two, that, you know, basically you're throwing the ball and running. So unfortunately, because of her gender, she's a girl, the coach doesn't think that she can play cricket or that she should be playing cricket, even if she's good. So I did have her talk about her love for cricket. Yes, she did bash baseball a little bit. she did say that cricket is superior. That's her, not me. And you know, so she did express pride towards the sport and towards playing it despite you know, the fact that she is not allowed. So I think that's it.
I probably have two instances, maybe one more direct, kind of early in the book. The group of friends are watching Black Panther and the movie. And so, of course, this book was written well before the passing of Chadwick Boseman. And so there's a line where he's talking about how empowered he feels after watching the movie. And he kind of says, you know, this is what Black pride feels like. And so that's kind of a direct reference. But I think similar to what Sarah was saying about her character, Wes, my main character, really is a bit selfish, and he doesn't really want to stand up for his community and throughout the book, he starts to change his perspective. He becomes a little less arrogant, but then also he starts to find pride in his community, the community that his mother grew up in, the community that his grandfather saved for years to be able to purchase a home there. And then also we find out some history of the neighborhood. And so then it becomes a source of pride for him. So not just, I don't want to leave my home because it's mine, but also how do I spread love in my community and make it more stable? And I think throughout the story, he really just finds pride and love for his community. And so kind of a bigger theme that's not directly said, but you can definitely feel his pride change and grow throughout the story.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. Louisa?
What's funny about my main character, Nello, is that like, I wouldn't say that she's either like directly or indirectly very proud of her heritage, but as the story goes on, she kind of comes to this place of acceptance for like her community and who she is. And I think through that, it's kind of like a wider, this is a reach, I know, but it's like a wider sort of acceptance of her and her culture. Because I think even for me growing up as someone who's Nigerian Canadian, it was very much like there were parts of my culture that I only saw at home. And then when I left home, then it's like, now this is the other side of me. Like I'm very Canadian or doing all these really Canadian things. And I think it was just like merging the two that was kind of the most difficult thing. As a diaspora kid, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would also agree, like trying to find that balance between the two is really difficult. Yeah, so I think just in general with Nello, it's probably just more of like a balancing thing. Definitely more indirect than direct though, I would say.
Yeah.
I actually read Louisa's book, and so I think she has a pride in like the various cultures, because like her best friend Kate, she's super prideful for like that family, everything they've been through, like their culture, the food. And so it felt like her pride was bursting even for her best friend's culture. And you know what I mean? Like that, I kept feeling like, man, she's going hard, you know, for her friend. And so I get it. I get what you're saying about it being indirect, but like she went hard, you know?
That's awesome. It's funny because I like didn't see it that way. I was just like, oh, she's just like, it's just her best friend. Like she's just trying to help her best friend. But I guess I didn't see it also with that cultural element. So that's cool. Yeah.
It's so interesting what other people pull out of your book as well. Like that can like highlight stuff that you weren't thinking about, but like that can still come out in the narrative. But I definitely get what you're saying about the diaspora experience. Like that was definitely my experience. Like at home, we like cook Trinidadian food and like that sort of thing. But otherwise, my experience was like very Canadian. None of my friends were from the Caribbean at all. And so it was like quite a Canadian experience, and like how I was really interacting with that part of my culture was through food, which I think is how my character ends up like indirectly expressing love for her culture, because she's so devoted to like making Trinidadian food for her family and like sharing that with her community. They have like what is this? Not like a bar. It's more like a backyard party than a block party, but like contributing her food to that, and like that's kind of she has a lot of pride in getting compliments for it and that sort of thing, and like that's kind of how that ends up interacting, which is this whole thing with witch culture on top of it, but it's a separate thing.
And something I forgot to mention as well, like not for the main character, but her love interest as well. He is someone who moved to America and now he's visiting Tobago again. And part of his sort of storyline is reconnecting with his roots, which is sort of, so it kind of crosses with hers. Yeah.
That's interesting. And that's really interesting dynamic of like her wanting to leave and him coming back.
Yeah. time.
That's the end of this For the Culture panel, a part of In Conversation. This is the first of a series of panels that will be coming up. And thank you so much to my panelists for joining me and for you for joining us. Again, this is In Conversation, so if you want to join the conversation, feel free to comment below and share your thoughts. If you have aspects of your culture that you bring into your writing, please share that with us. That would be awesome to learn more about. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to me already, you can subscribe below. And like I said in the beginning, all the authors' books and links and all of that social media stuff is also in the description below. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.
Bye.